Hello, everyone. This is Armando Perez-Carreno, and welcome to the Web Talk Show. Today with us is Joe Frankie III from JF3 Associates. He does personal branding and career transition, but you'll be amazed at his track record and just the level of sheer experience. Welcome, Joe. It's a pleasure to have you.
It is a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
I want to preface this conversation by saying we had an earlier conversation, which was so fun. I just want to tell our listeners the first time we talked, it gives me so much. What should I call it? Just love for humanity, because the fact that two people with such different backgrounds, levels of experience, uh, ages, locations, and everything, we sort of met through the LinkedIn platform, started communicating, and then engaged in a long conversation over the phone about leadership, about culture, about the military versus the civilian side. There's so many interesting things that just after the conversation just got me thinking how much value there is in just actually trying to listen to another person, another human being in front of us when we meet them wherever we are. Because if we could have that conversation and not even be in the same place, it's just magical.
It was we did have a great conversation, and yeah, I think we both agreed at the end it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I just I think it can remind people, it can remind us that when you meet someone, wherever it is, at work, at an event, at an outing, you don't just have to talk about the weather. There has to be something that you have a shared interest in, or maybe you want to learn about what they do. Like this show, it's about learning what happens behind the scenes in all sorts of different industries. So when I was speaking to Joe, it for me, there's so many paths we can take because there's so much that you have done in your lifetime, so many achievements, accomplishments, and things that you can share with us that just put us in a place where I don't know, it might spark some new path or a new creative, a new opportunity or something. So again, I'm really happy that we're able to have this conversation. And I want to ask you, Joe, just to get started, when we were talking last time, we sort of spoke of a parallel between what happens in the corporate world, executive world, and what happens in the military side, not the civilian side, and how people are brought up in the military to listen, to be proactive, to be given a task and have to complete it no matter what, versus, oh, this is not what I do. Maybe hand this something to somewhere else. So, what do you think?
Oh, the military is all about getting things done. I mean, um, war fighting is about getting things done, and you need to have to do it as safe as you can, and you need to do it uh, appropriately. Sometimes that is as fast as you can. It just depends on the side. But everything is broken down into what is the task? Here's the condition that you're going to work in, right? And this is the standard. In other words, so if you look at most orders, if you're given an order, say, okay, take your 11-man squad and take this hill, well, then it's your job to figure out, well, am I going to go left? Am I going to go right? Am I going to go straight ahead? Do I have any artillery fires that are allocated to me? Can I rely on that? Who are the other people that are? So you have to kind of think through, even at a small level, what your resources, what your conditions are, and your standard is to be in charge of the hill, right? And so the idea is we're not going to tell you specifically how to do it because whoever gave you that order is probably not there with you. Okay, so you have to make some independent decisions. And to me, this is the hallmark of the United States military. It's not a central command structure. It's decentralized, and you give mission-based orders.
I I think we are so far from that in some parts of the economy. We see it sometimes when an employee comes into a company and they're asked or tasked to do something and they either don't do it or they get lost and don't ask or they complain in some cases that
Well,
that's not what they were brought here for.
well, to me, if you go into an organization, I mean, the way I personally feel, you're brought here to do everything. Now, since you're new to the organization, you may not understand how things are done. So you get a battle buddy, somebody in your office that's kind of assigned to you to say, "Hey, let me show you the ropes. Here's the way that we do this." But after a while, somebody interviewed you. You won, meaning that there was other people available. You were picked, so, people are looking for, your delivery, your contributions to the team, in pretty short order. I mean, if this is your first job in your life, that's completely different. But, you've had a job, you're going somewhere else, then leadership is expecting you to be as productive as fast as you can. And I know I always made sure people understood, hey, you're here, you're part of the team. And listen, we do everything we need to do in order for the team to be successful. Okay. So you might have an individual part, you might have a collective part, but we're all here to be successful and take care of each other. And I just find out that works best than having these single lanes. I'm only in this lane. I don't get out of this lane. Now, some organizations are built that way because of compliance and other things, but in general, if you're trying to get things done, it's all usually a focus of, hey, this team is assigned to do this. If you look at all the line functions in business, like that would be sales. I mean, that is really the operational because you don't have a business if you don't have sales, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, uh, but everybody has to work together to make it happen.
And this is not to say I got in and now they're gonna, if I'm in sales, now they're gonna put me in engineering, right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about within a cohesive unit. Sometimes you might need to do something that's different from what you're used to, but that's like you're just saying aligns with the goal of the team. And I love that the team in a sense of it's not we're just a bunch of separate employees. We're a team. We're a group that's working together.
Well, if you're working together, one is it's more challenging, it's more fun, and sometimes it can be extremely frustrating. Okay. And the reason I say it's frustrating because if you have a team member that, is not, pulling his or her weight and, um, is really disrupting things. And, that might not be a good fit for that particular team. That's not to say that that's a bad person, but they don't fit into the culture of this particular team. Hopefully the company, the department, all has the same culture, right? But if you don't culturally fit in, it doesn't mean you're a bad person, but it's just going to be a long uphill battle, trying to bring this person along if they're, got their toes dug in the ground and you know got their fingernails and they just don't want to be pulled forward into the team. And a lot of times it's easier to work shorthanded with everybody that's working together than have two more additional people where you're just having to like check on them.
Mhm.
You know, you can't depend on them, those kind of things. Um, it's interesting dynamic. You know, I heard a sergeant major in the Army talk one time, and he said, "Look, if we took we had 12 divisions at that time in the Army." He says, "If we took the soldier of the year from each of these divisions, and we put them all together because we were going to make this super squad
Mhm.
of people." He said the dynamics is one of those persons wouldn't wouldn't fit.
Hmm.
They just wouldn't bond with the rest of the team. And, that's when I became, okay, this happens. Okay. So sometimes you get a team member who might be more productive in a slightly different environment in the company, you know. I mean, like, not everything is like, okay, you know, this is rocket science and I need this super degree in physics, to get
Mhm.
this thing done.
Mhm.
I mean, uh, most everything in any company can be learned by anybody. If you put your mind to it and people show you what's going on and do it, and you can be more productive. And so I've got a couple of cases right now where I'm working with two women where they're in a situation where I mean, they are pulling the weight. They're doing 50% of the work of a 6-person team,
Mhm.
and, that gets old.
Hmm.
And so what we're going to do is helping them with their LinkedIn profile, getting their resume straight so that they can go somewhere else and be appreciated for their contributions.
Wow.
It's
That.
one thing
Mhm.
if you have somebody that's producing, I mean, and acknowledge it
Mhm.
and reward it,
Mhm.
right? But if you're just saying, okay, uh, this person's the dumping ground for all the other people that can't do anything, and we're not making any effort to change the other people, that's one, it's not equitable. And, uh, and that's not going anywhere good.
That's right. There's something that you said in our last conversation, which I found very interesting, and not everybody is going to agree with it, but I think there is quite a bit of truth in, if we consider it. What is your thought about multiple majors in university, for example?
Well, personally, this is what I believe in, and there's good causes and reasons for other points of view. But I look at a classical Greek education in the arts and sciences. I mean, to me, um, in universities and colleges used to be this way longer ago. I mean, 50s, maybe 80, even 100 years ago. I mean, it was a classic education in the arts and sciences, right? So the sciences would be science, biology, chemistry. The arts would be, how to communicate in the language, writing, and literature, because in history, there's all of this stuff to be learned. So where I'm going with that is I don't think you particularly need a major. In other words, if you have a true education in the arts and sciences, everybody takes it. It's a common denominator. And then when you go to the company teaches you in 3 to 4 weeks. It's really stuff that it wants you to know about, stuff you need to know in the company and how to work it, and all that kind of stuff. Because all college says is that you started at something and you finished it. It doesn't say whether you learned anything. Okay. And
Mhm.
so to me, a traditional education in the arts and sciences is extremely beneficial. And then you pick up what you need to know with your company. And then later on, say 7 to 12 years. If you decide you want to specialize, then there's a master's degree in that particular arena. And secondly, I don't think most people know what they want to do when they're choosing these majors. They choose it because they think it's cool or what have you. So I just think we're better off. And, it's a standard way. Everybody realizes this is what you're coming out with. You're basically certified by the college that said you achieved these standards, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so all college says is you have the capability to educate yourself further on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So to me, education's all about educating yourself. And today it's even easier, right? I mean, technically, if you just had a phone somewhere in the middle of nowhere, India, I mean, you could, and you had unlimited resources to the internet, right? You can access it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can educate you can get a college education out in the boonies.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was working at it, and you were trying to figure out, okay, I don't understand the way this professor taught this portion of calculus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had to rely on going back to the professor, talk to other people, try to find, get some tutoring, that kind of stuff. But today, I mean, somebody could go to five different people that are showing the same thing on calculus that's on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the way it was explained to you, you don't understand. But now you have six different people that explain it and say, oh, now that he said that, I get it. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I say you have the power to educate one yourself. The company has the power, with its own internet system to, continue your education, et cetera. I just think we all need 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 to know the basics. And
Mm-hmm.
let me share a little story with you. I
Sure.
was watching on a LinkedIn post. So this guy said, "I can teach you how to read a tape measure in 2 minutes." And I'm thinking, I got to watch this, you know, because he headed up a welding school.
Mm-hmm.
And think about it, if you're welding, you probably need to measure steel, metal,
Mm.
you know.
Quite a few
So,
things.
so he's talking about high school graduates that don't know how to read a tape measure. And I'm thinking, in the fourth grade, in my little country school, they taught us how to read a tape measure because the tape measure was the thing that they used to teach you fractions, and 2/8 of an inch make up a quarter of an inch, 2/4 make up a half inch, you know, uh, that kind of stuff. And so both men and women in school, or boys and girls, could read the tape measure because young ladies need to be able to read a tape, to cut fabric, right? And measure fabric, measure things. And so I just thought this was wow. Yeah. A high school graduate that doesn't understand how to read a tape measure. Um, there are some basics, and I think college ought to be more toward the basics of the arts and sciences. You can always specialize in something when you know what you want to specialize.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
think about it. Um, if you've been out in the world and you've had two or three jobs and you're going to work on your MBA, you know exactly what you want out of that MBA program. And all this other stuff they give you, you just kind of flush it. You may remember it for the test, but you've been out in the world. Okay, I really want to understand this. I want to understand that, and you can guide your own education because now you've got the background and you're headed in the right direction that you want to go. See, most people have no clue about what they want to do. Um, they might think that, but when they get out there and get in a position, they say, "Wow, I didn't realize this." And so, you got to be able to change. So my take on it is, I think we spend too much time on the majors, and you really need more basic
Mm-hmm.
arts and sciences so that you are got the foundation to do other education on your own, or go after certifications
Mhm.
or other things that are going to benefit you personally and directly.
I tend to agree. There's this, some people will get defensive, of course, about this conversation, but I think it's an excellent discussion point because if you've been to college, let's talk about software engineering, for example. You are going to take 4 or 5 years, 6 years, whatever amount of time it takes you to do the program. You're going to learn the most important thing, like you just said, is going to be the fact that you can do a program, that you can actually stick with it, right? That's what and most importantly, it's teaching you the meta skills of learning so that you can then learn on your own. Because if you think that the software engineering is a great example, because you will do the whole thing and you're going to learn some languages and some application types, etc., and some databases, whatever you want. By the time you graduate, that's all history. Everything has changed. There's new languages. There's new, especially now with all the AI stuff. So why did you spend so much time learning it or memorizing it for these tests or for these other things? When at the end of the day, when, like you were saying, when you get to a company, you're just gonna use whatever they are using, whatever stack they are using, and so now you're gonna have to go in and in 2 weeks learn to do. Right. So everything else, I mean, that could have been time well spent, like you were saying, on actual meta skills that will help you be better at learning or collaborating or any other thing.
I saw years ago there was a eighth grade test, from the 1850s or something like that, and it was out in a farming community, and the amount of math in it and percentage of germination of seeds. I mean, the whole education was geared to, this was a farming community,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and but I mean, the rigor of the education was much harder than I thought it would be. Or remembering back to my eighth grade, um, I mean, they were doing complicated math and the whole algebra thing where you have a story. So many seeds grew, on this road, so many were planted, and you had to figure out you had to figure out things. It's nothing that you needed a computer with, but you did need a piece of paper and a pencil, and you and to get that. And I don't think anybody today could do that, from the eighth the eighth grade. Not that I could at the time I had the eighth grade.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There is a disconnect with this idea that everyone is the same and should go to call everyone and here has to go to college and do university and do this other thing. And that's when there's many types of people. There's those who are going to be entrepreneurs, might not need it at all because they're just going to do their thing and not care about anything else. Some will. Some definitely want to take the business route and do it that way. Some will want to do trades. And so those might want to go trade school route and just get to work, and that's perfect for them. And some are the ideal person who wants to go to school and go to a company and have follow that path. But everyone is different.
I remember my father-in-law telling me the stories. He grew up in Brooklyn, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there were high schools that, you know, specialized maybe in three trades. So his trade was being a photographer. So in his high school education, I mean, he understood cameras, he understood lenses, he understood depth of field, what's in focus. He understood how to take a picture. He understood all the chemicals involved in a dark room, how to process film. There was even a bookkeeping class on how sold photographs. In other words, you could walk into a photographer and you had, as a high school graduate, and you had all the skills in order to do that. And so this was, back in the 40s, 1940s. And I remember even, when he graduated from high school, World War II was going on. So, uh, the Army looked at him and said, well, you're going to be in the Signal Corps, as a photographer because, we don't have to invest any time. You've already got these skills. We know you can do it. So why should we waste the time putting you through this drill, and you could be productive, quicker. And later on in his elder years, in San Antonio, he carried the same ethic into a charter school that he was the CEO of. But his big thing was, in these schools, you needed to teach people what they needed so when they graduated, they could be productive in the workforce, in whatever the local workforce is. And so at that time, what he was doing is, he was putting people through small computer classes. I mean, this is back when, computers were first, you know, used. I mean, they were big, they sat on the table, but, he exposed them to, how to operate a computer, not that he was trying to teach them software, but the understanding of the bits and bytes and, how data was moved and all that kind of stuff, so that they were at least had some experience with it, and were prepared to learn whatever the company needed to learn. Um, you know, Back then it was a big deal. I mean, how you inserted a disc, you know, and the proper procedure that you don't have any fingerprints on it. I mean, there was a lot of technical things that had to happen with a computer. Fortunately, that's gotten much easier over time. And we were talking also about how elders had, education. So this charter school backed up to a retired living facility. And so what he built was, since their fence was in between, he built this area, that both sides could secure, right? But with picnic benches under there. And he went to this retirement community and say, hey, how many of you want to be mentors?
Nice.
Okay, so people could meet, in this common area, kind of on the school ground in the retirement community. And the mentors were volunteers, you know, and help pass their wisdom, ideas, the ways to deal with things, all that kind of stuff. So I think what we're talking about is education. And, education to me, I think there's certain basic things you should know inside and out. And, to me, you need to know those things before you worry about more complicated things, because you need the foundation. The foundation is where you're going to build up, right? So if the
Hmm.
foundation's weak, you can't go up very far.
That's amazing. That idea of taking advantage of having those two places so close together and turning it into an opportunity to have mentorship for these kids. That's golden. What's your take on mentorship? Do you think people do you think it's a good thing? Do you think people get value out of having a mentor?
I think, it's up to the two people. You're going to get value out of it if both of them, have a common commitment, right? Like if you have a really good mentor, but he has no time to see you or talk to you, um, I mean, I don't see, you're not going to get really good value out of that. And so, because I see a lot of people saying, well, I really want to get, the head of the department to be my mentor, and I said, well, maybe not the head of the department, but maybe one of the guys that or gals that works for him, you know. because this person has got to choose to spend some time. By the same token, you got to spend some time. And if somebody's mentoring you and giving you things, trying to help you out, I mean, you got to do your part. They might even suggest you read this book and that, in a month or so, come back and let's discuss it, right? But if you don't read the book, there's not much to discuss. I end up helping a lot of junior officers when they come out of the Army and they're entering the private sector. So a lot of come to me and say, "Hey, Joe, I want to get in the oil and gas sector. I want to get into the knowledge arena or something like that. And can you help me?" And I said, "Sure, I'll be more than happy." I said, "Go to my website. I have a resource page. Go look up the petroleum side. There's about 3 books there." And and I said, "If you'll read those books, and they're not small, but they're written, for the non-petroleum person, right? So there's no math in them or anything else. So a lot of it's terminology, the culture of the oil and gas industry, all those kind of things." And I said, "Hey, take a look at that stuff. Give me a call. We'll have lunch, and I'll discuss those books with you." And because I'm not going to make introductions unless you're willing to make an effort, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're not willing to make an effort, why should I waste this other person's time when you go in there and you don't know the difference between permeability and porosity, which are big things in oil and gas industry, but they
Mm-hmm.
both with a P and they're different. So, you know, uh, how can that person have a conversation with you if you do not know the vocabulary of the oil and gas industry? And a lot of the vocabulary in the oil and gas industry is about, geology.
Mm-hmm.
So, uh, and so then I will try to help make those introductions for those people that have made the effort, right? But if you haven't made the effort, why should I waste this other person's time? Because then when I call him, he'd say, "Well, Joe's just going to send another guy over here that's not ready to go,"
Mm-hmm.
and so, it's all about trust and relationships. To get something to happen, you have to build trust. And it's a lot easier to maneuver if you have good relationships. Well, how do you get good relationships? You get good relationships by serving other people. So one aspect of anything you want in life, where are you as a servant? How are you serving other people? And then if that's the case, then other people can serve you. If you give big, you get back big.
Yes. Do you think there is a higher percentage of people who serve in the military that when they come out to the private sector are maybe more ready to serve and help others versus someone that doesn't have that background?
Yes. And that's because the military is the greatest common denominator of people. Okay. In other words, where do you have a situation where you take people from all over the country, you basically put them together, you know, uh, whether they like each other or not, doesn't matter. They all have to work together because if you don't work together, you all get punished equally. You know, it's like, okay, well, Billy Bob was supposed to, clean under his bunk and, he didn't do it. Well, you know, everybody's going to pay for that mistake. So, um, what happens is you have to learn to work with other people. It's in a compressed environment. You're stressed. Um, you have to learn new things fast. And, there's a way of doing that where you can learn things fast. And so people have been through this experience, I think, uh, are ahead on their maturation process. I mean, typically, if you look at psychology books from years ago. I'm talking about 40 years ago. They thought that men, matured at about 28. And I'm thinking if you look at now, it's even older. And that's because as we go in further in time, there are less things in the private sector that harden, men. Uh, for example, if you're on a football team in Texas, listen, you get out there in that August heat and, coach got, all kinds of things he wants to have happen in 2 hours, right? I mean, most coaches are microscopic managers on what they want to get done. But you sweat, you have to work together, you have to perform as a team, same thing with maybe doing a harvest.
Mm-hmm.
It's hot, you got to work together as a team. Well, those experiences are becoming less and less with, opportunities, right? And so the military kind of combines that in its basic and individual training. And somebody that's been through that, I think, is more open because they've been experienced, they've been exposed to other people. And it's not that they have to like the person,
Mm-hmm.
they all have to get along in order to do what the collective mission is. And it's okay that we don't like each other, but we're all going to perform to a standard.
Hmm. That's an interesting way of putting it. So, and it works in business as well. You don't have to absolutely love or enjoy your colleague because you might have completely different points of view, but you have to work together.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, um, I've probably learned more from people I didn't like because I ended up more in a discussion with them on points of view. Okay. In some cases, I won them over to my point of view. In some cases, I mean, okay, they had a better view of that. And so, we accepted that. So, for me, I've benefited from people I don't necessarily like. I don't want them to be my best friend, but we were respected colleagues. They just had a different view of the world, but we both worked together in a place and got things done, you know. And we were both mindful of each other. And I think we helped educate each other because both of us are trying to, have a point of view. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and as long as you're open to discussion. So notice I said discussion,
Mm-hmm.
so discussion to me doesn't involve emotion. Okay, when you get motion into discussion, you're no longer in a situation, I think in most cases, where we're starting to judge things, you know. So that's why I like people say, well, it was a debate. And I said, well, debates don't involve any kind of hate, yelling or shouting. They are just very articulate points of view where, other people are listening to this and maybe we got to pick one or the other. And so people are articulating the positive and negative points of both.
Yes. Yes. It sounds like there's a lot of overlap between the corporate world, enterprise world, the executive level, and how things are handled in the military. And I think for those of us who are not or have not had the experience with the military, see it as whatever we see in film or whatever we get to glimpse in if our city is a base city. But we don't know really what happens behind the scenes, and we might have some prejudices or ideas that it's only that we see from afar. But it sounds like there's a lot of things that are very similar to the civilian world in hierarchy and also in actual business because there's a business side to the military, right?
Yeah. if you look at the way the corporate world, executes its supply chain, a lot of it, the Army or the Department of Defense has spent, all kinds of money studying and, coming up with processes and all of that kind of stuff. The military was, the first in RFID technology, trying to keep track of where stuff is, through RFID, and that later bled into this private sector. And the reason the private sector follows the military in some cases is the military is doing the research and development. So how can we keep up with our stuff, know where it is, track it? Okay. And then the civilian world can come back behind that and say, okay, what worked? If the military could do it all over again, what would they change?
Hmm.
And modify it, make it a little better. So the business side of the military, to me, works, you know, a great deal like the private sector. I mean, you have to get stuff, from A to B. You have to know where it is. You have to have a process for turning over responsibility of it from, A to B and all that kind of stuff. And the hardest thing in the world is what I call the last mile, because anybody can get a bunch of stuff to a port. Anybody can get a bunch of stuff to an airport. But then how do you break all that stuff down? Because it goes to the last person. So in other words, so if I had 100 things that came in on this airplane, right? Well, not all of it goes to company A. It may go to 26 different companies. Well, the effort and involvement of identifying what that is and having a plan to get it, to the company. I mean, the last mile is the challenge. And if you look at Amazon, FedEx, and all those people, what they're into all the time is how do I make this faster, cheaper, uh, you know, getting the last mile done.
And there's all the logistics. The same applies. There's bound to be some manufacturing. There's food. There's resources. There's because you have all these people that need to be fed, need to get places, need to work, and then there are goods that need to be transformed. And there's this whole industry or industries within it that we don't see from the outside, but there is a huge machine.
Right. I mean, the Army is probably one of the largest corporate organizations in the United States. And same could be said of the other services. And it operates a lot like, a corporate. I mean, you have a chief executive officer, right? So you have the same structure in the Army. Um, it's it's an autocracy. In other words, some person is put in charge, and they're held responsible for everything that happens or fails to happen. And a lot of times, something that fails to happen may not be your fault, but hey, you were in command. So, uh, but no, I think the biggest challenge, and the reason it's different, people see it as different, is because in the Army, you're operating under its own vocabulary. And I see this when I try to help veterans transition out of the military into the private sector, because they know what they did in the military. But how do we take what they did and describe that in a vocabulary that a hiring manager understands? Because if, the hiring manager is looking for, okay, hey, I need somebody to supervise this fleet. And so the soldier comes in and he said, well, I was I had a section of a petroleum transport company, and so the hiring manager has no idea what that means. Okay. So when I was working with this person, I said, look, You were responsible for 12 5,000-gallon tankers. You had to keep them operationally ready. You had to keep the drivers qualified. You had to make sure that the drivers, from a rest recuperation standard, were doing it safely. And you maintained an operational readiness of rate of 96%. You had, 14 customers in a 100,000 square mile area. Okay. So once we put all that down, then the hiring manager said, "Oh, okay, you managed a fleet of trucks. Okay, and you have a safety record." Because I said, "Was anybody killed, maimed, or wounded?" In that, they said, "No, sir, no one was hurt." And I said, "So you maintained 100% safety record." But see, when he said, "I'm a section leader of a petroleum transport company," a hiring manager has no clue. The only people that would have a clue of that is if that person had worked in the military in that kind of logistical area.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help?
It does, because that is very good. The people, just helping them with how to express themselves. We'll get into coaching in a little bit, but that part of transforming what somebody already knows and is already great at, and maybe it's just a way of saying it. They might be having difficulty finding a job or a position, but it's just the wording that they're using. And they're doing exactly what the other person would dream their candidate would have, but it's just they're speaking a different language.
Right. So really, the biggest challenge I think is making you've got to convey to the hiring manager, you got to speak in their terms. You know, they don't have enough time in their lifetime to figure out your terms. And you're entering the private sector, so it's your responsibility. And now there's more and more AI gizmos. You know, that's the benefit of AI is you can take person and say, okay, I did these things in the military, and it can help transfer and at least get you a 60 or 70% solution. When I first started this, I mean, it was like one individual listening or looking at their efficiency reports and trying to extrapolate, through questions and answers. Okay, this is how you compete for your civilian uh, equivalent of that. Another example where an oil and gas leader asked me, says, "Joe, I mean, we need some health, safety, and environmental experts." And I said, "Well, I've got, some people who've come out of the Army, um, and I think they would be really good." And he said, "Well, I'd like to just take a look at them, get a feel for them." So I sent this one gentleman over, and he comes back. He said, "Joe, I mean, I talked to the guy. He's a sharp guy, but, he really doesn't know anything about health and safety." I said, "Well, that's because you don't understand the health and safety and environmental things he's worked with. And oh, by the way, he doesn't understand it either." And he said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, he's a lieutenant in the infantry. So that means he was a platoon leader in a combat environment, okay, overseas. And so he had 20 18-year-old, 19-year-olds with automatic weapons and explosives. And then he had a supervisory structure that handled them. And first they had to train them, how to use all this explosive and equipment. Then you had to make them proficient at using it, safely. Then you had to combine getting them to move with each other, firing live ammunition using explosives and not hurt themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and then train proficiently so that they could do that to the enemy. And so I said, everything in the Army, I mean, you look at safety, as, hey, I need a health and safety guy. Well, the Army trains people with every technical thing with the safety embedded in it.
Hmm.
Don't teach safety afterwards. In other words, there's one way to run a rifle range, safely, and lieutenants learn how to do that, and and so doing all of these things. Once I explained that to him, I said, they were able to do their mission and not get themselves hurt with a lot of serious stuff that you can get hurt with. It's dangerous work. And so what that lieutenant's used to looking, I said, you could take him out to a rig site and he could see whether stuff is being done safely or not. He might not know the technical term for that, but he could look at where pipe is racked, how it's stacked. He could look at stuff. And then what you need to do is train him the 2 to 3 weeks or, month on the specifics that, you would want him to know. But he already knows safety inside and out. The problem is he can't articulate it because when we hand a person a weapon, all the safety about what you do with it, when you load it, where you point it, all that's embedded in the fact that we just hand you the weapon. So that's just another example of where it's a different philosophy. In other words, everything you do in the Army, if they train you on it, the safety is embedded in the original training.
Amazing. That reminds me of the story you told me of you had this experience in the harvest when someone gave you a heads up of a machine that was coming your way, and it just brings to me to mind like that person, because they were brought up working in the field, they already had that safety embedded in them as well, in their sense. And so they could very quickly always be mindful of their surroundings, and in this case tell you, hey, watch out, there's this thing coming your way, which maybe you still didn't have that sort of awareness.
Right. Yeah. In that particular situation, the driver of this combine basically cut the grain, and so now the combine is at the end of the field, right? And so he's unloading the grain, on the truck. Well, that the noise out there. I mean, you've got that's running, other machinery's running, so it's hot. And so I'm standing out there because I've cleaned the screen. My job, I had a broom and you clean the radiator screen, get all the junk off of it, right? So I'm back out of the way from him, waiting for him to, pass out. But they were backing up a truck, that was coming my way. But because of all the loud noise, I don't see it. And at that time, it's hot and I'm just kind of, you know, standing there waiting for the next machine to come in. And he jumped up and he was starting to wave his hands and he pointing and I turned around and this truck's backing right toward me. And I'm in that view where the guy with the truck, he's looking out both sides of the mirror, but he doesn't see me because it's a long truck. And sure enough, if that guy hadn't done that, I would have been serious, if not killed, seriously injured. And even though I might have made a noise on the back of this truck with all this machinery going on, nobody would have heard it. Even if I shouted, nobody would have
Mm-hmm.
heard it. So I was very fortunate, and it taught me a very valuable lesson. That out there around machinery and moving stuff, about every 30 seconds, you take a look around and see what's happening because you can't depend on your ears because everything is making noise.
Hmm. I that's I it's we take so much for granted sometimes, and people who have specific scenarios where they work or where they live, or by the nature of what things they work around, or in this case the military, the way it teaches you, there's you get these skills ingrained in you that you might not get otherwise, and they're so valuable but not so talked about.
The military gives you a lot of skills that it needs. Okay. So skills are individual tasks. Like, for example, cleaning your weapon is an individual task. Okay. Using your weapon with a team member and maneuvering, that's a collective task because both of you are involved in completing this task. But it assumes that you already know the individual task of how to move, right? Now you're moving with two. And when you master that task, now you're moving with four, and then you learn how a whole squad supports another squad, and then how the whole platoon kind of comes together. So it's a building block, and it's crawl, walk, run, right? And not unlike a lot of training that is being done, but I think the military collapses the amount of training and the way it's done. They get a lot done in a fast period of time. Now, a lot of those skills are transferable. It's just a lot of them have to be articulated so that the private sector can understand. Okay, yeah, they've done that before. And then secondly, one thing I like about people is they're used to getting a mission type order. Like, okay, hey, do this. Well, it's their job if they don't quite understand it to go figure it out. That means they might come ask you and say, "Hey, I'm kind of new here. The boss has asked me to do this, you know." And you'd say, "Well, the first thing you want to do is go to this particular program and log in the fact that he gave you this task." So, I mean, they'll know how to walk around, ask, and get it done. And they prefer those type other than a very specific, you know, do it this way.
I like that. I think it's we were talking about meta skills of learning and like in college and whether you do the whole thing or just the basis. But I think it's a good way to go about many things in life. Like give me a a concept or a task that has an outcome or a deliverable and explain to me sort of how it should work. Maybe if I need I might qualify it a little more with you. But once I understand it, I should be able to now go figure it out and do it instead of you telling me you have to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P in that order because one, I might get bored. I still might make a mistake because it's so repeatable. And if it's so repeatable, then a machine could probably do it instead of the person. So if it's tasks that we have to do as humans, then yeah, I think we need that ability. We need to work on that muscle of that ability to understand a task or a goal and figure out what we need to do to, to do it.
Yeah. And one of the things that, we talked about the other day was in the military, you're working with all kinds of people, somebody that came from Brooklyn, somebody that
Mm-hmm.
came from New Mexico, uh, all kinds of accents, they, that makes up, our army. And I think that's what made it strong is it comes a little bit from everywhere.
And also, it reminds us that everyone is different, right? We were talking about the coaching part of you personally do one-to-one coaching. And we started our conversation with that, and I was very intrigued because nowadays, if you go on LinkedIn and you're looking at content, there's a lot of people doing the one-to-many approach, the scalable way of coaching, which is totally fine, and it's a very good way to make money because you can scale it. But is it the best always for everyone? Well, why is it better, if possible, to coach one on one?
Um, what I find is everybody wants what they want, right? And sometimes people are having difficulty trying to figure out what they want, right? Because they're in that stage of life or something. But anyway, but I always believe if you know where you are and you can define where you want to go, then there's a way to build a bridge to get you from where you are now to where you want to go. So to me, that's highly individualized. Okay. Because if I had a room of four people, they've got different goals and desires, and I can talk in generalities about things that they need to do. But the other three don't want to hear me talk to Roberto over here and give him all the specifics that doesn't pertain to him. So I have found that, especially working with people on, coaching them on LinkedIn and, what they need to do to get what they want is highly individualized. I think I was explaining to you the other day, I've had companies come and say, hey, I've got these 40 people. I want you to come here and give a 4-hour block, tell us how to do, LinkedIn. And I said, I can give you an overview on LinkedIn. I can tell you the importance of LinkedIn. But if you want these people to develop, um, then I would need to put them, with where they are, right? Because then technically in any term, we would give a test, right? See, okay, let's see where they are, you know, and then based on where they are, you would decide what you need to do. So I look at LinkedIn and LinkedIn 101, 201, 301, 401, 501, 601. So there's PhD level LinkedIn, but most people do not need that to get what they want. So that's why I think you end up highly individualized on coaching people because one, they don't want to waste their time. And I don't want to waste my time because if I'm working with four people, how do you progress them?
Mm.
And there might be people that have mastered that, but what I've found in the 740 people I've professionally coached is, there's no two of them alike. And I had one company call and said, hey, Joe, we heard about you from such and such. You got this great track record. We're going to come in here and we're going to get you all these leads and all this stuff. And we're going to take all we're going to put it on the internet and people are going to swipe their card for 15 minutes of Joe, you know. And, and I said, well, how did you get these guys? How did you help these other coaches? And they said, well, I mean, they had all their material and all that stuff. And I said, well, that's interesting. He said, well, let me take a look at your material. I said, I don't have any material. And he said, well, how's that? And I said, because I've never coached the same way twice. Because I've never met somebody's twin that had the exact same needs, desires, hopes, and dreams, right? They're all different. And so I believe that if you're going to help somebody, you help them on one. I'm not saying that's the only solution. I'm just saying, in my experience, I can get further with one person, on their journey than I can with multiples.
That's amazing. I wanted to bring that up because we see so much of the other side, which is totally valid. But I think there's a big space for the one-on-one, and I think some people need to hear that. Just know that it's still a thing, that it's still a possibility. And I expect, and Joe, please correct me if I'm mistaken, but at the executive level, if you're coaching people at the executive level, there's probably quite a bit more value in that as well, both time spent, the value of their time, and everything that goes around it.
Yeah, because I mean, look, if you're coaching somebody, there's a lot of work on their part, and I always tell them, this is not easy. I mean, if you're looking to, you know, really transform yourself, you're committing to like writing a term paper on yourself. So there's a lot I have to work on to get their subconscious out of the way because their subconscious has been in the way of them doing it on their own. They were held back by themselves. If not, they'd already done it already. And I always tell people, here are the books. I can give you a reading list and all this kind of stuff. And if you internalize all that, you can do it yourself. And I've had very few that, have been able to do that. And it just requires a lot of self-discipline because in your subconscious, you're continuing to doubt yourself. If not, you'd already be moved forward, right?
Yes.
So I found that the first hour is try to get their subconscious moved over here so I can talk to the real deal.
Nice. I keep bringing this up. There was an example. Rahul Karan came on the show, and he said a very funny example. I think that's why it stayed with me about the stop sign. Like if we're talking about training, yes, you run a stop sign. The police officer gives you a ticket and sends you into school again. Take another driving school. Well, he says the person knows he has to stop at a stop sign. So you don't have to train him about why you have to stop at a stop sign. It's something else. So like you're saying, you have to, if they didn't stop, it's their own subconscious. Is there something else going on there that they didn't want to stop for whatever reason? They were in a hurry or whatever thing, but they don't, if it was just the material, yeah, they could learn on their own. They have to stop at the stop sign. So I understand perfectly what you're saying here. Coaching is for those of us who, I mean, you know where you have to go, but there's something stopping you, and that other person is gonna help you go over those little barriers or big barriers to get to where you already know you need to go.
Yeah. And, I always tell people, I said, look, if you don't get it on paper, I can't coach it. Because, what you've done, in your life and, I can ask questions that kind of pull things out. And, that helps. But the bottom line is your history. I had this one guy say one time, well, Joe, I mean, I'm just not sure, that's of any value. And I said, well, I said, is your mother still alive? He says, yeah. I said, is she, and you interact with her? I says, yeah. I said, what's her phone number? What do you need your phone number for? And I said, I'm going to call her and I'm going to ask her, in her opinion, what her son's famous for. And she's going to tell me about 7 things. And so if you can't remember it, I'm telling you, your mother can.
That's that's a good tip. That is a good tip. And if she doesn't, then you probably don't either. There,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of that too. I recently had an experience, funny one, like funny we're talking about LinkedIn. I've never been big on LinkedIn for a long time because I was never in the corporate world. And so recently I started looking into it and it's a fantastic tool, especially nowadays. And I had a guest on the show and we had a great show, et cetera, et cetera. But that's it. And we kept talking about other things. And then one day I changed my profile because now I'm learning about it. And so I make it focused. I make it talk to my ideal customer profile, et cetera, et cetera. Things that we would do normally in marketing because I've even
Right.
taught that stuff for marketing. But I don't know. I've never really paid attention to LinkedIn. So I did that. And then he comes back to me and says, oh, now I know what you do. Like just by seeing that, even like, we had hours of conversation, and so yeah, it's important to put it down and
Yeah.
figure it out.
Well, if you get it down, somebody can give you a tip on how to make it better. But if it's
Hmm.
not down there, nobody can give you a tip.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How did you get into LinkedIn, Joe? That's my
Okay.
question.
So, a lady that, I had come out of the military in 2004. And so, I'm trying to get a job. Okay. And back then, people don't realize that, your audience, back then your jobs were in the newspaper. I mean, the Houston Chronicle had maybe 7 or 8 pages of classified, jobs, and so you go through looking for the ones that look like you, and you're going to make the phone calls. You got your resume kind of put together, and you're going and knocking on doors. There wasn't this whole internet of things,
Mm-hmm.
right? Uh, and newspapers were on their way out, but not that day. So this lady called me, and she worked at Trinity University up in Dallas Fort Worth, and she was in the area that helps students get jobs, the career council or whatever. And she knew I was looking for a job from another mutual friend, and she said, "Joe, there's this thing called LinkedIn," and she said, I think it's going to be, I think it might help you." And so she gave me some information. I went out there. And so I'm getting on LinkedIn. LinkedIn came about in 2003, as a startup, right? An idea. And they were doing this, and it was kind of like this whole resume online thing where people could see your resume.
Okay.
And I didn't understand, when I first thought about it, I thought, well, they're trying to steal my identity. And the reason I thought that is we had the dot-com boom when, in the early 2000s where everybody's identity, was being stolen and all that kind of stuff. And as a military guy, I mean, you're just hammered over and over about operational security and data, even back then, and it's even more so today. But so I didn't do anything with it first couple of months, and then I started playing with it a little bit. And, first of all, I took my resume and I just, embedded that in there. And then I could see these other people out there, you know, and I just started working with it and trying to take my resume of what I'd done in the military and work time and time again. How do I make this sound more civilian,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so, when I first got out of the military, I couldn't. I went to a lot of places, and they said, "Well, Joe, I mean, you're interviewing for the project manager, but you're the best project manager I've interviewed. But you've handled more money than the CEO. You've handled more people than the CEO. You've handled bigger projects than the CEO." And I said, "Well, I'm not interviewing to be the CEO." And he said, "Well, we're just not going to hire you." I said, "Okay." And he gave me some good advice. He said, "Look, go out here, find some guys putting a deal together, find some guys, where you can use your whole multifunctional talent and, you know, uh, and they need it. And then you're there at the beginning." And he says, "You get some experience in the private sector that way. Once you have some experience, then you can kind of maneuver."
Hmm.
And so when I was working in this company, they needed, we were working on a deal in China. So I was trying to, okay, how do you find people that have already worked in China? Well, the only way back then was you went to a big executive search firm like the Corn Ferries and whatever, and you contracted with them, and they did a 6-month best effort to go find you a person,
Mm-hmm.
you know, Uh, but they the ones that had the resumes on everybody,
Okay.
these big databases. And so we did that. We were looking for a project manager in China with Chinese experience. In other words, worked over there. And this firm came back and said, "Well, we gave it our best effort. We're keeping a third of your money." And we just didn't find the guy that you're looking for. And then I started, okay, got on LinkedIn. I started looking for um, project engineer, China, all that stuff. So I'd get a hit. So that person might not be ideal, but at least I find out that they've been in China,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then you finally work a way where you send them a message, get on the phone with them and saying, "Look, you might not be the right guy, but do you know other guys around you or gals
Hmm.
that have been in China? And, so you just get another couple of names. And so I was able to start getting people we needed by just using LinkedIn to, message and, get a phone number, have a conversation, get other referrals.
Hmm.
So that saved us on the recruiting side heavily. And so I just started using it a lot. And at that time, my family was in Dallas, Fort Worth. I was in Houston because my son was trying to graduate from high school. So during the evening, I would work with LinkedIn, and um, try to connect with people, you know, that would really be neat to connect with,
Hmm.
mainly CEOs, decision makers, all that stuff, craft, messages, and just, build up a good portfolio of good people.
Hmm.
And I had the time, right? Because, my family wasn't with me. And so I did that. And so I got to be pretty sharp on LinkedIn. And it wasn't as sophisticated as it is now. So then, after about a year of this, I started coaching on LinkedIn, mainly helping the military. I said, this is a great tool. If you get on it and you explain what you did in the military in civilian terms, this is going to be easier for you. And then, secondly, I could help people without physically being face to face. You
Hmm.
could do it over the phone, that kind of stuff, or they sent you stuff. So I really started my coaching in 2005. So I've been coaching on LinkedIn for 20 years. And, I did it as a ministry for about 1,200, 1,500 people. And then, started doing it as a professional from 2014 forward.
Wow. That's, so you go back to the roots of LinkedIn and
Yeah, I could call the chief of marketing on LinkedIn on the phone and he would talk to me. Because I
amazing.
was one of their aggressive users
Uh-huh.
early, right? And you could, and they were interested in what I was
Mm.
seeing and the feedback. And now LinkedIn doesn't have anybody I think that has a phone number.
Yeah, that's likely. And then they've moved ownership and all that. And so I,
Well, yeah, because they went from, they got acquired by Microsoft, and a lot of times people would say, "Well, why don't I learn this LinkedIn deal?" And I said, it's going to be around a while. And he said, why do you think that? Somebody else will replace it. And I said, well, somebody else will compete with it. And Microsoft has the cash to buy them and integrate them. And that's what you see is the whole education part of LinkedIn. Linda had that, and Microsoft bought Linda for 3.2 billion and integrated it into LinkedIn.
yes, I don't think it's going anywhere. It's getting a lot better. If anything, and the fact that, and I don't know if you follow him at all, but Gary Vaynerchuk, he does a lot of media. I think he owns the huge media business, but he's out there and he's a lot into TikTok and Instagram and all that. But he's still, even with all that, he still for B2B mentions LinkedIn as the tool that you have to get into. If you're doing any sort of B2B, you need to be doing content on LinkedIn.
Right. So to me, LinkedIn is the best business marketing and business intelligence tool on the planet. Because I mean, if you're a business, whether you like it or not, you got to be here. Yeah.
And I I love we're having this conversation because it's for so many years I just saw it like as a glorified PR place. Like people would just whatever I saw, and that was just because of how my feed was, I guess. I would only see, oh, this person now got a job, or this person got this other thing, or now they released a new office, and that's all I would see. But now there's so much content that people are putting out, they're teaching through it, they're sharing, and it's become a learning experience apart from a networking experience. But like you said, since all businesses have to be there, it comes a lot of you comes along for the ride, because I can reach out to someone cold to start a conversation, but they can immediately see who I am and who I'm related with, and how if I'm posting, how my content has evolved through time. Whereas if I just send them an email, there's no background.
It is, and it's got a lot of tools. And what I've learned with it is I have my go-to people in certain countries. Like if I really want to know something that's happening in France, I've got two retired military guys over there that are, in business like me. And so if I want to understand something that's going on, I just reach out to them, or call them on the phone and say, "Hey, can you give me a 3-minute dump on this? Because I'm not understanding, what's going on in France, with that." So you end up with all your go-to people in all these countries. If you need to reach out to them, if you need help, by the same token, they're reaching out back to me as well for understanding things, or can you help me with this? So it's a huge relationship tool if used properly.
Using it properly, I think you are the subject matter expert here. There are so many people that are sharing like the tips and tricks, and this is what you need to do, and they even sell courses and things like that. And it's all great, but at the end of the day, I do you think many of the strategies, which is common sense, networking, truly listening to the other person and being interested, that worked for you 20 years ago, still sort of apply today, right?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example about you know um, I get people that want to connect with me. You know, I'll get anywhere from 10 to 20 a day, and so I'll go through them. And if somebody hasn't sent me a note with that, they just want to connect. I'll send them a note back and saying hi. I have, we haven't met. You know, um, hey, this is what I do. Here's a calendar link. Let's get on a 15-minute phone call. Because I haven't met you. I don't know you. You know, and so what comes back from that is about 87% of the people do not respond back. So I don't know if that was a chat bot, a computer generated request, or maybe they don't want to take the time to um, have a brief conversation. But if you're not willing to have a brief conversation, why in the world would I want to be connected to you if you're not going to talk to me? That means there's no effort, there's no relationship, and so to me, your LinkedIn network in today's time is all about quality, not about quantity. In fact, one of the originators on LinkedIn, one of the chief architects, he wanted to make LinkedIn like a German town, small German community where everybody knew. And they were going to limit your connections to 50.
Wow.
And the only reason they abandoned that model was that Facebook, went out and you could get, a bazillion if you wanted them, and so I think they thought they needed to compete with Facebook. But his original thing was, 50 go-to people, and when you think about it, I mean, how many really good friends do you have? You can probably count them on one hand, that you could call up middle of the night and, they'll react,
Hmm.
you know. So, so imagine if you had, 50 or even 15 people all over the world that treated you absolutely with the same equal relationship. I mean, that is powerful.
Hmm.
And so LinkedIn gives you these tools. And so, um, my point is, I don't want to take up time with people that just want to be connected to be connected. And then secondly, if I'm having a conversation with somebody, one, I know they're real. I know that they can speak the English language
Hmm.
and, they're worth connecting with because we've had a conversation.
I really like that. And when we spoke, we started chatting, and I really like that you did that because it's different from most people. And and then you asked me to call. And I said, of course, because we're trying to have a human conversation. And it turned out into a very long conversation. But again, like I said at the beginning of the show, the it just brought some renewed trust in the our power to connect with other people in a real way, even if we're far.
Absolutely. Uh, you know, I, I've coached in, I think, 15 different countries, and I've never advertised, which means that people have found me, as opposed to me trying to go out to 15 different countries and find clients, right? So I'm a big believer in that, if you build a world-class LinkedIn profile, they will come. If you build it, they will come.
Amazing. Joe, it has been another incredible experience talking with you today, just like the other day. And I really wanted other people to get some of these golden nuggets that you keep giving us. I would like us to close with something that you told me last time, and I think it was an African saying. Could you share that with our listeners about what happens when an older wise person goes away?
Yeah. So one thing, we were traveling in Africa in 2018, and I saw this in more than one country, but it's kind of like their version of a proverb, right? An African proverb. I mean, I saw it in artwork. I saw it on tile, and if you think about it, you have to remember that Africa is a tribal society. I mean, they have nations, right? There's borders, right? But really, it's all about, the tribes.
Hmm.
And so this proverb says, when an old man dies, we lose a library. Okay, because when you think in a tribe, and if you go visit tribes, a lot of them, they're they're not sophisticated and what we would call sophisticated, but their way works. I mean, they support their people, they take care of their children and all of that kind of stuff. But what they rely on is the elders are their libraries.
That is amazing. I think we all need to remember that because there's so much we can learn from experience, from others' experience, that that's why I was so honored that you would have the call in the first place because of your trajectory. And I've learned so much in just the brief time that we've spoken. So I really want that for everyone as well. And I really thank you for sharing that. I really
Man,
enjoyed it last time as well.
this was this was fun. I enjoyed the conversational style. I think it's easy to listen to and it's easy to interact with.
Yes, thank you so much, Joe. And if people want to find you, what's your website so that people can find you? I put it in the show notes as well.
Okay, my website is JF3 Associates.com. So that stands for JF3 Associates because I'm Joe Frankie III. And we've got a book out there. If you're interested in LinkedIn, it's a 1 hour read called LinkedIn, uh, the 5 minute drill for executive networking success. Now we say executive, but it's being used in high school business classes mainly because it's a 1 hour read.
Mm-hmm. Nice. I'll make sure to put that in the show notes. I'll put your website, the book, and your LinkedIn as well so people can see some of the content that you're posting. But it has been a true pleasure, Joe, and I hope we talk again soon.
I look forward to it and thank you for having me. I appreciate it.